Change always comes quietly, I think, like the desert wind at night. You don't notice it until it's already shifted the sands beneath your feet. For me, that change began the moment I agreed to join Jameson on this trip, though at the time I told myself it was nothing more than a friend helping another friend. Jameson had called it a retreat, his voice carrying that effortless warmth that made everything he said sound like an invitation to something sacred. He was a Sheikh's son, though he wore the title lightly, as if he wanted to be known more for his laughter than his lineage. I had known him since university, years of late-night study sessions, long arguments over coffee, and the kind of silence between us that never felt empty. Still, this trip was different. It wasn't about exams or crowded cafes. It was just him and me traveling across a landscape that seemed too vast for words. I've always been the cautious one, careful with choices, measured with words. I bury my restlessness in books, in sketches, in the safety of routine. But Jameson? He's all instinct. He teases the world into giving him more than it intended, and somehow it does. That's why, when he suggested we spend a week in the desert, his desert, I hesitated, then said yes. Now, as our jeep cut through endless stretches of golden dunes, the sky painted itself in shades of fire and violet, I found myself stealing glances at him. His profile against the fading sun looked almost unreal, like something out of a story too grand to belong to my life. I told myself it was admiration, nothing more. But when his hand brushed mine on the gear shift, a jolt shot through me sharper than I expected. "You're quiet," he said, turning to me with that familiar half-smile. "I'm always quiet," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed, a sound so easy it made me ache. "No. Tonight it feels different. Like you're thinking of something you won't say." He wasn't wrong. I was thinking of too many things, how his laugh curled around me like warmth, how the air seemed charged when he leaned closer, how part of me feared this trip would unravel the neat box where I kept my feelings for him hidden. The camp appeared ahead, lanterns flickering against the growing dark. It looked like a place carved out of time, far away from the world where I could pretend things were simple. Yet, as Jameson hopped out first and turned to offer me his hand, I knew simplicity was a lie. My chest tightened when our palms touched, and though I smiled, inside I was already bracing for the change I couldn't stop. Jameson and I had a history stitched together by small, ordinary moments that somehow felt extraordinary. We met in our first year at university, both too lost to find the right lecture hall on our own. He cracked a joke about how the building's layout was a puzzle designed to weed out the weak, and I laughed harder than I should have. From then on, he made it his mission to make me laugh at least once a day. What started as coincidence turned into tradition. Coffee runs before exams, late-night kebabs after study sessions, and endless debates over which professor had the worst handwriting. He thrived in chaos, I sought order. Somehow our differences didn't clash, they fit. He called me his compass, the one who reminded him deadlines were real and not mythical creatures. I teased him back, calling him my distraction, though secretly I cherished how easily he pulled me out of my head. That dynamic hadn't changed much over the years. Even now, as we unloaded bags from the jeep and carried them into the tent set up beneath the desert sky, it felt the same. Except it didn't. "Careful," I warned when Jameson dropped his bag a little too close to the fire pit. He raised a brow, smirking. "Relax. Fire likes me. Fire doesn't like anyone. It burns. And yet," he said, shrugging off his jacket with a flourish, "you still sit next to me." I rolled my eyes, but my lips betrayed me with a smile. "That's because you'd get lost without me." He laughed again, low and easy, and for a second I forgot to breathe. Inside the tent, I quickly realized there was a problem. Instead of 2 sleeping bags, there was one, large but still only one. I froze, staring at it, waiting for Jameson to notice. He said after a beat, running a hand through his dark hair. "Looks like they forgot the second one." "That's inconvenient." I knelt down, pretending to inspect it, though my heart was suddenly pounding. Jameson tilted his head, grinning. "Inconvenient for you, maybe? I don't mind sharing." I glanced up sharply, but his expression was all innocence. Well, almost. His eyes lingered on mine a little too long, the corners crinkling as if he knew exactly how flustered I was. "You're insufferable," I muttered, shaking my head. "And yet you're still here," he echoed my earlier words, his voice softer now. I busied myself arranging my bag, trying to ignore the heat rising in my cheeks. It was such a small thing, a sleeping bag, but suddenly the space between us felt charged like the air before a storm. Later we sat outside beneath the lanterns sipping mint tea. The desert night wrapped around us, cool and silent except for the crackle of the fire. Jameson told stories about his childhood, How he used to sneak away from lessons to race camels with the stable boys, how his father once caught him napping under a palm tree instead of studying Quranic verses. His words carried a kind of nostalgia I rarely heard in his voice, and I found myself memorizing the way his face softened when he spoke of home. "You always had a rebellious streak," I said, nudging his arm lightly. He gave me a look half playful, half serious. "And you've always been the one who noticed." Something passed between us then, unspoken but undeniable. The firelight caught in his eyes and I couldn't look away. I told myself it was just the intimacy of the setting, the isolation of the desert making everything feel heavier, sharper. But when his hand brushed mine as he reached for his cup, and neither of us moved away, I knew I was lying to myself. We sat like that for a long while, caught between familiarity and something that felt like the edge of change. And though neither of us spoke it aloud, I sensed it. The desert wasn't the only thing that would keep us awake tonight. The desert has a way of reminding you who's in charge. One moment the night was still and clear, stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. The next, a wind kicked up, sharp and relentless, sending sand whirling against our tent. The lanterns flickered, one of them toppling with a soft thud before Jameson caught it. "Sandstorm," he muttered, his tone calm but his jaw set. We scrambled inside, pulling the flap shut against the rising gusts. The air in the tent grew tense, heavy with the muffled roar outside. I sat cross-legged, brushing grit from my hair, trying to steady the quick rhythm of my breathing. Jameson moved with practiced ease, checking the poles, tightening knots, every motion sure and confident. "Don't worry," he said over his shoulder, flashing me a quick grin. "It'll pass." I wanted to believe him, but the tent shuddered with each gust. I shifted on the single sleeping bag, hyper-aware of how small the space really was. Jameson joined me a moment later, shaking sand from his hair, his shoulder brushing mine as he settled. It was nothing unusual, we'd sat close before, countless times. But now, with the storm rattling around us, the nearness felt different. Too close. Too deliberate. I tried to focus on the sound of the wind, the steady rhythm of my own breathing. But then Jameson leaned back, propping himself on one elbow, his body angled toward mine. His knee brushed against my thigh, and though I told myself it was accidental, he didn't move it away. "You okay?" he asked softly, studying my face in the dim light. I nodded quickly. "Yeah. Just not used to this." "The storm?" "Being stuck," I admitted, then regretted how raw that sounded. He chuckled. "You've been stuck with me before. Library study rooms, remember? We survived worse." I smiled despite myself. "That's debatable. At least then we had coffee." His grin widened, the kind that tugged at something deep inside me. "True. And Wi-Fi." The banter should have eased the tension, but instead it sharpened it. Every laugh, every glance lingered longer than it should have. I told myself not to overthink it, but my mind betrayed me, filling in the silences with everything I hadn't said in years. The wind howled louder, rattling the tent walls. A draft slipped in, chilling the air. Without hesitation, Jameson reached for the sleeping bag, unzipped it halfway and gestured toward me. "Come on. It's warmer if we both," he trailed off, but the implication was clear. My pulse spiked. I wanted to protest, to make some excuse, but the cold bit at my skin, and more than that, the thought of lying beside him, close enough to feel his breath, close enough to drown in what I'd been avoiding, was both terrifying and irresistible. I slid in carefully, every movement exaggerated in my own mind. Jameson followed, the bag rustling as he settled beside me. The space was snug, his shoulder pressed to mine, our legs brushing with each shift. I tried to find a neutral position, somewhere safe, but there was no escaping the warmth radiating from him. For a while we lay in silence, listening to the storm batter against the canvas. My heart hammered in my chest, loud enough I feared he'd hear it. Then softly he spoke. "Do you ever think," he began, pausing as if weighing the words, "how strange it is, the people we end up closest to?" I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Strange how?" "I don't know. Just, out of all the people at university, all the people in our lives, it's you. Always you." The words hit me like a jolt. I turned slightly, catching his gaze in the dim light. His expression was calm, almost casual, but there was something in his eyes, something that made my breath catch. I wanted to answer, to say everything I'd buried under years of silence, but fear coiled tight in my chest. What if I ruined this? What if naming it shattered the only thing I was sure of, him beside me steady as the stars? Instead I offered a small smile. "Maybe we just got lucky." Jameson studied me for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he reached up and brushed a grain of sand from my cheek. The touch was fleeting, almost careless, but it lingered in my skin, setting me ablaze. The storm raged on, but inside the tent, everything narrowed, his breath mingling with mine, the warmth of his body pressed to my side, the unspoken words crackling louder than the wind. I lay awake long after his breathing evened into sleep, staring at the shifting shadows on the canvas. My mind kept replaying his words, his touch, the closeness that felt both impossible and inevitable. And for the first time, I wondered if the storm outside wasn't the only one I had to survive. The storm had calmed by morning, leaving behind a silence so heavy it felt like the world was holding its breath. The dunes outside the tent had shifted, reshaped into unfamiliar curves. The desert always remade itself after chaos, and I wondered if we could too. I hadn't slept much. Jameson's breathing beside me had been steady, almost lulling, but every brush of his arm against mine, every accidental graze of his knee, kept me wide awake. I lay there, torn between desire and dread, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest, the faint curve of his lips even in sleep. When he finally stirred, stretching with a soft groan that made my stomach twist, he caught me staring. "Morning," he said, his voice rough, unguarded. I cleared my throat, shifting away under the pretense of sitting up. "Morning." He sat beside me, hair tousled, eyes half-lidded. The intimacy of it, seeing him like this, unfiltered, was almost unbearable. I busied myself with brushing sand from my clothes, pretending I wasn't aware of how close he still was. We stepped outside into the desert air, crisp after the storm. The horizon glowed soft with sunrise, the world washed clean. Jameson tilted his head back, breathing it in. "You ever think about how small we are out here?" he asked. "All the time," I admitted. My voice cracked with honesty before I could hide it. He turned and something flickered across his face. I looked away, afraid he'd see too much in my eyes. The day passed quietly, too quietly. Normally, Jameson filled silence with stories, teasing, laughter. But today he seemed thoughtful, watching me more than usual, though he never said why. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. By evening, as the desert cooled, we returned to the tent. The air between us was thick, weighted with everything we hadn't said. I sat cross-legged, fiddling with the hem of my sleeve, while Jameson leaned back on his elbows, watching the firelight dance across the canvas walls. Finally, he broke the silence. "You've been distant today." I froze. "I haven't." He gave a short laugh, shaking his head. "You forget I know you. You retreat when something's on your mind. Always have." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet his gaze. His eyes were steady, searching. I wanted to deflect, to make a joke, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "What if I told you it was you?" The silence that followed was unbearable. His brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't look away. "Me? Yes." My voice was thin, trembling. You're always on my mind. And I don't know what to do with that." There it was, raw, terrifying, out in the open. My chest tightened, bracing for the fallout. Jameson sat up slowly, his expression unreadable. "You mean?" He trailed off as if the words themselves were too fragile to touch. I nodded, my hands twisting in my lap. "I've tried not to. For years I've tried to tell myself it's just admiration or friendship or comfort. But it's more than that. And I'm scared, Jameson. Scared that saying it will ruin everything." His lips parted, then closed again. For a long moment he just looked at me, and I hated myself for the tears burning at the back of my eyes. Finally he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Do you think I haven't felt it too?" My head snapped up. "What?" He gave a small, almost disbelieving laugh. "You think I don't notice the way you avoid my eyes when I get too close? Or how your voice changes when you say my name? I've known even if you didn't." I stared at him, heart pounding. "Then why didn't you?" "Because," he cut in, his voice low, "I was afraid too. Afraid of what it would mean. Afraid of what my family would say, what yours would think. Afraid of losing you if I was wrong." His words hit me like a wave, washing away the walls I'd built. My hands trembled as I reached out, hesitating in the space between us. He didn't move, didn't flinch. "So we've both been pretending," I whispered. Jameson's gaze softened. He leaned forward, closing the gap until his forehead rested gently against mine. The contact was so simple, so tender, yet it unraveled me completely. "No more pretending," he murmured. My breath caught. "What happens now?" He smiled faintly, his hand lifting to cup my cheek. "We stop running from it." The warmth of his palm grounded me, and before I could second-guess myself, I tilted forward. Our lips met, tentative at first, hesitant, as if both of us were testing the weight of years of silence. But when he deepened the kiss, when his thumb brushed my jaw in the softest caress, the fear dissolved. It wasn't fireworks or thunder, it was quieter, steadier, like finding something I hadn't realized I'd been searching for all along. When we finally pulled back, his eyes lingered on mine, full of something I'd never let myself hope for. "I should have told you sooner," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I shook my head. "We told each other when we could. That's enough." He chuckled softly, pressing another kiss to my temple. "Still the reasonable one." "And you're still impossible," I replied, though my smile betrayed me. We sat there in the quiet glow of the lantern, wrapped in the fragile, breathtaking truth of what had just unfolded. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside me had finally broken open, leaving something clear and undeniable in its place. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The air inside the tent felt different after that kiss, lighter, charged, yet somehow calmer than it had been all night. My heart was still racing, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from the warmth of Jameson's hand still resting against mine, his thumb tracing slow, absent-minded circles on my skin as if he'd always had the right to. For a while, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was no longer heavy with what we weren't saying. It was comfortable, like settling into a truth that had always been waiting. Jameson was the one who finally broke it, his lips quirking into a crooked smile. "So, after all these years, it takes a sandstorm to get you to admit you like me?" I groaned, burying my face in my hands. "Trust you to ruin a perfectly good moment." He laughed, pulling my hands away gently. "Ruin it? I'm celebrating it. Do you know how many times I've wanted to tell you?" I arched a brow. "Clearly not enough, since you didn't." "Hey," he said, feigning offense. "I was being noble, respectful, giving you space." "Or you were just scared," I countered, though there was no bite in it. He grinned, shrugging. "Fine. Maybe both. But it doesn't matter now, does it?" I shook my head, unable to stop the smile tugging at my lips. "No, it doesn't." The shift between us was subtle but undeniable. Where before every touch had been accidental, hesitant, now his hand found mine easily, his shoulder brushed against me deliberately. And each time, my chest filled with something fierce and bright, as if I'd been holding my breath for years and was only now learning how to exhale. We stretched out on the sleeping bag, lying side by side. The storm outside had left the desert unusually still, the silence broken only by the occasional flutter of canvas. Jameson tilted his head toward me, his expression soft in the lantern glow. "Tell me what's going on in your head," he said quietly. I hesitated, then let out a shaky laugh. "Honestly, I'm still trying to believe this is real. That I'm not going to wake up and find it was just another dream." His smile faded into something gentler, more earnest. "It's real. I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." The weight of those words settled in me, grounding and terrifying all at once. "What about everything else? Your family, mine, what if?" He reached over, pressing a finger to my lips. "We'll figure it out. Later. Tonight it's just us." I searched his face, finding only certainty in his eyes. For someone who lived so much of his life improvising, Jameson carried a kind of conviction I envied. I wanted to borrow it, hold on to it, let it steady me. So I nodded, letting the worry fade into the background. "Just us." He leaned closer, brushing a kiss against my cheek, lingering just long enough to make my pulse quicken again. "See? You're already better at this than you think," he teased. I rolled my eyes. "You're insufferable. And yet," he whispered, his lips ghosting against my skin, "you still love me." The words were bold, playful, and terrifyingly true. I laughed, half out of nerves, half because there was no point denying it anymore. "Yeah, I do." His eyes softened at that, and for a moment, neither of us smiled. It was too raw, too much. But then he pulled me closer, tucking me against his chest like it was the most natural thing in the world. We stayed like that, wrapped in the kind of closeness that didn't need words. I felt his heartbeat under my ear, steady and sure, and I thought of how far we'd come, from study halls and late-night coffees to this, to a love that had survived silence and storms. Eventually he spoke again, his voice low, almost hesitant. "When this trip ends, things won't be easy. But I don't care. As long as you're with me." I tightened my grip on his shirt, the truth spilling from me without hesitation. "I'm not letting you go." He kissed the top of my head, laughter humming in his chest. "Good. Because you'd never find your way out of this desert without me." I groaned, smacking his arm lightly, but the smile stretching across my face wouldn't leave. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something waiting for us, wild, uncertain, but ours. The morning after felt like the desert itself had been remade. The sky stretched wide and pale blue above us, the dunes reshaped by the storm into soft new ridges. It was quiet, but not the uneasy silence of yesterday. It was the kind of quiet that felt like a promise. Jameson was already awake, crouched near the fire pit, coaxing a small flame back to life. He looked up as I stepped out of the tent, his hair still a mess from sleep, his smile unguarded. "Morning," he said, holding out a steaming cup of tea. "Morning," I echoed, taking it from him. Our fingers brushed, lingering just long enough to remind me that nothing between us was the same anymore. We sat side by side on a woven mat, watching the sun climb higher. For a while we didn't speak. We didn't need to. Every so often his knee bumped mine and neither of us pulled away. Eventually Jameson broke the silence. "So, what happens when we go back?" The question had been circling in my head since last night, but hearing him say it aloud made it real. I swallowed, staring at the horizon. "Things will be complicated." "Complicated?" he repeated, his tone wry. "That's one way of putting it." I glanced at him, finding not fear but amusement in his eyes. It unsettled me how easily he carried things that felt heavy to me. But then again, that was Jameson, always finding light where I saw shadows. "Do you regret it?" I asked before I could stop myself. His head snapped toward me, his expression fierce. "Never." The word was so immediate, so certain, it stole the breath from my chest. "Good," I whispered, my lips tugging into a shaky smile. "Because I don't either." He grinned then, that irrepressible grin that had pulled me into his orbit years ago. He reached over and took my hand, lacing our fingers together with an ease that made my heart ache. "Then that's all we need. One step at a time. Together." The warmth of his hand grounded me, steadier than anything I'd known. And in that moment I realized he was right. We didn't have to figure it all out now. The future could be uncertain, messy, even difficult. But it was ours. We finished our tea in companionable silence, and when it was time to pack up camp, Jameson made a show of struggling with the sleeping bag. "See," he said, wrestling with the zipper. "Even the desert thinks we belong in one." I rolled my eyes, laughing despite myself. "You're never going to let that go, are you?" "Not a chance," he replied, his smile wicked but his eyes soft. Later, as we loaded the jeep, he paused, looking back at the dunes. "You know," he said almost to himself, "storms reshape the desert. Nothing ever looks the same after." I followed his gaze, the sand glittering in the sun, ridges carved by the night's chaos. Maybe that's not a bad thing. He turned to me, his expression unreadable for a moment before it melted into something gentle, certain. He reached for my hand again, not with hesitation this time but with quiet confidence, and I let him take it. We stood there like that, two figures against the vastness of the desert, holding on. Not because we had all the answers but because we finally had each other. When we climbed back into the jeep, Jameson shot me a look that was half playful, half serious. "Ready to get lost again?" I smirked, fastening my seatbelt. "As long as I'm lost with you." He laughed, starting the engine, and as the jeep rolled forward over the shifting dunes, I felt something I hadn't in years: certainty. Not in the path ahead but in the person beside me. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like a storm waiting to break. It felt like sunrise.